Get this publicly janitor out of my lecture hall. Look at this black man. All he can do. Clean.
Whitmore grabbed Jerome's wrist, raised his hand to the class.
That's the value of your brain. Trash and trash.
Jerome looked at the board, calmly.
Third line. Sign error.
Whitmore's face turned pale.
Eric? Check it again. 100 years. No one solved it. A stupid black man thinks he can? Let's see what this genius can do.
Laughter. Jerome took the chalk, wrote one line, set it down, and left. The laughter died. The answer made Whitmore almost unable to stand. But before we get to that moment, before the chalk, the silence, and the line that shook that room, you need to understand where this story begins. Boston, Massachusetts, Ashford University. One of those old money schools where the buildings smell like history and the hallways are lined with oil portraits of dead white men. Every frame, every plaque, every name carved into stone. White. The math department sits inside Hargrove Hall, a 19th century building with mahogany walls and vaulted ceilings. This is the kind of place where your last name matters more than your first idea, where pedigree opens doors, and where people like Jerome Sullivan are invisible. Jerome was 42 years old. He had been mopping the floors of Hargrove Hall for 9 years. Every morning, 5 a.m., he showed up in his gray uniform. He emptied trash cans, he scrubbed bathrooms, he cleaned chalkboards after lectures. And not once, not a single time in 9 years, did a professor look him in the eye and say his name. But here's the thing about Jerome that nobody knew. He grew up in Roxbury, raised by his grandmother, a retired high school math teacher named Dolores Sullivan. That woman put numbers in his head before he could spell his own name. By the time Jerome was 15, he was solving problems most college students couldn't touch. At 18, he earned a full scholarship to Boston University for mathematics. Then his grandmother had a stroke. Jerome dropped out sophomore year. No hesitation, no second thought. He became her full-time caregiver for the next 7 years. He fed her, he bathed her, he sat beside her bed every night and worked through equations on napkins, because even then, he couldn't stop thinking in numbers. She passed away 5 years ago. Jerome never went back to school. Instead, he applied for a custodial job at Ashford University, not because he wanted to clean, because he wanted to be near the math. Every night after his shift, Jerome would stay in the empty lecture halls. He'd study whatever equations were left on the boards. He'd fish discarded journals out of recycling bins. He filled notebook after notebook, dozens of them, stacked in a locker in the basement. No one ever opened that locker. No one ever asked. Now let's talk about the other side. Professor Gerald Whitmore, 58 years old, tenured, published in 4 top-tier journals. The man solved a major conjecture early in his career, and that single achievement had carried his reputation for 25 years. He wasn't a fraud. That's important. He had real talent, real credentials, and a very real belief that those credentials made him better than anyone who didn't have them. Whitmore didn't hate black people the way you see in movies. He didn't scream slurs in the street. His prejudice was quieter, structural. He looked at Jerome and saw a uniform, a mop. A man who existed to clean up after people who mattered. It never once occurred to Whitmore that the janitor mopping his floor at midnight might understand the equations he couldn't solve by noon. That's the most dangerous kind of racism. The kind that doesn't see itself. Whitmore chaired the department's biggest event, the Centennial Mathematics Symposium. Every year, Ashford used it to showcase its academic prestige. But this year was different. This year, the symposium was hosting the Whitmore Caldwell Prize. $250,000. A guaranteed publication. All for anyone who could advance progress on the Bellingham conjecture. The Bellingham conjecture. Posed in 1923. Over 100 years old. A number theory problem so stubborn that generations of brilliant minds had broken themselves against it. Whitmore himself had spent 15 years chasing it. His framework, the Whitmore partition approach, was considered the most promising path forward, but it remained incomplete. He was close, or at least, he believed he was. The symposium was 3 weeks away. Open to the public, streamed live online. Whitmore had handpicked 3 elite doctoral candidates to present their attempts. The stage was set. The cameras would be rolling, and every seat in that 500-person auditorium would be full. Jerome Sullivan would be there too. Not in a seat. Not at the podium. He'd be the one mopping the floor before the doors opened. But what Whitmore didn't know, what nobody in that building knew, was that the janitor in the basement had been working on the Bellingham conjecture for 3 years. Alone. In silence. In notebooks no one had ever seen. And he was further along than anyone imagined. It happened on a Tuesday night. Jerome was cleaning Lecture Hall C after Whitmore's graduate seminar. The students were gone, the lights were dimmed, but the blackboard was still full, covered in dense equations from the day's session. A partial proof attempt on a lemma connected to the Bellingham conjecture. Jerome set down his mop. He stood in front of the board. His eyes moved line by line. First line, fine. Second line, fine. Third line, he tilted his head. A sign error. Negative where it should be positive. Small, easy to miss, but it cascaded. Everything after line 3 collapsed because of it. Jerome didn't think. He picked up the chalk, crossed out the error, wrote a corrected substitution in the margin. Clean, precise. Then he put the chalk down, picked up his mop, and went home. He forgot to erase it. The next morning, Whitmore walked into the lecture hall. He saw the correction immediately. Unfamiliar handwriting, not a student's. He frowned, studied it, checked it twice. The correction was right. His jaw tightened. He erased the entire board. He pulled the building's security log. Who was in this room last night? Answer, custodial staff. One name, Jerome Sullivan. Whitmore found Jerome in the basement hallway 30 minutes later. Jerome was on his knees, scrubbing a stain from the floor. Whitmore stood over him. He didn't crouch down. He didn't lower his voice. He wanted Jerome to feel the height difference. "Did you write on my blackboard?" Jerome looked up, paused, nodded. "Stand up when I'm talking to you." Jerome stood, slowly. The custodial contract is very clear. You clean the rooms, you do not touch the boards, you do not touch the chalk. You do not touch anything that requires a functioning brain. Do you understand me? Jerome met his eyes. There was a sign error in line 3. It was wrong. Whitmore stepped closer. Close enough for Jerome to smell his coffee. Wrong? You're telling me, a janitor who didn't finish community college, that my work is wrong? It wasn't community college. It was Boston University. I don't care if it was Harvard. You have no degree. You have no credentials. You are nothing in this building except the man who takes out my trash. Jerome said nothing. His hands stayed at his sides. Whitmore reached into his briefcase, pulled out a folded problem set, 5 pages. He held it up. This is my graduate qualifying exam. My doctoral students, students with degrees, with published research, with actual intellect, they struggle with these problems. He didn't hand it to Jerome. He placed it on the mop cart, carefully, deliberately, right next to a bottle of bleach. Solve these. All 5. If you can solve even one, just one, I'll let you sit in the audience at the symposium. Front row, like a real mathematician. He leaned in. But when you fail, and you will fail, because you're not built for this, you stay in the basement. You never touch my boards again. And you remember exactly what you are. He straightened his tie, turned around, walked away. His shoes echoed down the empty hallway. Jerome stood there, alone. The fluorescent lights buzzed above him. The problem set sat on his cart between the bleach and a roll of paper towels. He picked it up, unfolded it, read the first problem. His eyes narrowed. Then, just barely, the corner of his mouth lifted. He folded the paper, slid it into his back pocket, grabbed his mop, and went back to work. But that night, when Jerome sat down at his kitchen table and opened those 5 problems, something shifted. Not in the math, in him. Could a man with no degree, no title, and no name silence a room full of people who had all 3? Jerome's apartment was small. 1 bedroom, a kitchen with a leaking faucet, peeling paint on the ceiling. Nothing on the walls except one, the east wall. That wall told a different story. Photocopied journal pages, hand-drawn diagrams connecting different mathematical frameworks, sticky notes with half-finished proofs, and notebooks stacked from the floor to eye level, dozens of them. 9 years of silent, invisible work. This was Jerome Sullivan's real life. Not the mop, not the uniform. This. He sat at his kitchen table that Tuesday night, unfolded the problem set. 5 problems. 5 chances to prove he was more than what Gerald Whitmore saw. He picked up a pencil and went to work. Problem 1, a number sequence. At first glance, it looked random. No obvious pattern. The kind of problem designed to burn hours. Jerome stared at it for 90 seconds. Then he smiled. He wrote, disguised Fibonacci modular form. Shift the index by 2, it collapses. 4 lines of work. Done. A problem designed to take a doctoral student an entire evening, solved in under 10 minutes. Problem 2. A statement about prime number distributions. The classic approach was proof by contradiction. Assume the opposite, follow the logic until it breaks. Jerome worked through it. Clean. Textbook. But then he did something strange. In the margin, he wrote a note. The obvious contradiction appears at step 2. But Whitmore designed this to test patience. He wants step 4. He's checking if you stop too early. Read that again. Jerome didn't just solve the problem, he read the professor's mind. He understood not only the math, but the psychology behind why Whitmore chose this specific problem. He saw the trap inside the test. That note would haunt Gerald Whitmore. Problem 3. An integral that looked unsolvable using standard methods. Every conventional technique hit a dead end. This was the wall. The problem designed to break confidence. Jerome stared at it for a long time. 20 minutes. 30. Then he stopped trying to solve the integral. Instead, he asked a different question. What if the integral wasn't the point? What if the question itself could be reframed? He picked up his pencil. In 3 lines, he showed that the integral was mathematically equivalent to a known geometric identity. A single substitution. 1 elegant move. The entire problem folded in on itself like paper. He didn't power through the wall. He walked around it. Problems 4 and 5, solved back to back. Efficient. Sharp. No wasted steps. Jerome finished all 5 problems in 2 nights. Problems designed to take graduate students a full week. He didn't celebrate. He didn't tell anyone. He stacked the pages neatly, walked to Hargrove Hall before dawn, and slid the solutions under Whitmore's office door. No note. No name on the paper, just the work. That afternoon, Whitmore found them. He sat at his desk, opened the pages. His face was calm at first, professional, the face of a man grading ordinary work. Problem 1, correct. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Problem 2, correct. Then he saw the margin note, the one about step 4, the one about the trap. His hand stopped moving. He read it again, then a third time. Problem 3, the reframing approach. Whitmore leaned back in his chair. He hadn't considered that path. In 30 years of teaching, no student had ever reframed that problem. Not once. Problems 4 and 5. Correct. Both. 5 for 5. Perfect. Whitmore closed the pages. He sat in silence for a long time. The clock on his wall ticked. Then he said quietly to no one, "Someone helped him." And there it was, the wall. Not a wall made of math, a wall made of something much older. Something built into Whitmore's bones so deep he didn't even know it was there. A black janitor with no degree just solved his entire qualifying exam in 2 days. The evidence was in his hands. The proof was on the paper. But his brain refused to accept it. It couldn't, because accepting it would mean that everything Whitmore believed about intelligence, about who deserves it, about who's built for it, was wrong. So his mind did what minds do when the truth is too uncomfortable. It invented another explanation. Someone must have helped him. The next morning, Whitmore called Jerome to his office. Jerome stood in the doorway, uniform, work boots, hands still smelling like cleaning solution. Whitmore sat behind his mahogany desk. The power structure was visible, intentional. "Sit down." Jerome sat. "You solved the problems, all 5. Whitmore's tone was flat, not impressed, clinical. "I'll honor my word. You've earned a seat at the symposium, front row." He slid a printed ticket across the desk. Jerome reached for it. Whitmore pulled it back. Just an inch. Just enough. "But let me be very clear about something." He looked directly at Jerome. "I don't know who helped you. I don't know who whispered the answers in your ear. But at the symposium, in that auditorium in front of 500 people and live cameras, there will be no one to hold your hand." He released the ticket. "Enjoy the show, Mr. Sullivan. Try not to embarrass yourself." Jerome took the ticket, stood up, walked to the door. He paused. He could have said something. Could have told Whitmore that no one helped, that every line was his, that the margin note on problem 2 proved he understood the material better than the man who wrote the test. But he didn't. He left the office, closed the door quietly behind him, and walked back to the basement. Because Jerome Sullivan had learned something a long time ago. You don't prove yourself with words. You prove yourself with work. And in 3 weeks, in front of 500 people, Gerald Whitmore was going to learn that lesson the hard way. The symposium was coming. And Jerome wasn't just going to sit in the front row. He was going to change what was written on the board. The morning of the symposium, Jerome Sullivan did something he hadn't done in years. He ironed his shirt. Not a dress shirt. He didn't own one. He ironed his cleanest gray uniform, pressed the collar flat, brushed the lint off the sleeves, polished his work boots with a damp cloth. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror for a long time. A 42-year-old black man in a janitor's uniform, about to walk into the most prestigious mathematics event in the Northeast. He folded the ticket into his front pocket, took a breath, and left. Ashford University's Grand Auditorium. 500 seats, vaulted ceiling, crystal chandeliers that had been hanging there since before Jerome's grandmother was born. Cameras mounted on tripods along the aisles, the whole event streaming live. The front rows were packed with visiting professors from Stanford, Columbia, the University of Chicago, doctoral students in blazers, department heads in tailored suits. The air smelled like ambition and expensive cologne. And then there was Jerome. He walked down the center aisle. Heads turned. Not the curious kind of turning, the uncomfortable kind. A woman in the third row leaned toward her colleague and whispered something behind her hand. A man in a tweed jacket looked Jerome up and down. Uniform, boots, no lanyard, no badge, and physically shifted his knees to make it harder for Jerome to pass. Someone near the back muttered, just loud enough, "Did they not lock the service entrance?" Jerome kept walking, eyes forward, back straight. Nora Callahan was waiting in the front row. She was a second-year graduate student, the only person in the entire department who had ever seen Jerome reading journals in the recycling room. She'd saved him a seat. When Jerome lowered himself into the chair, his uniform sleeve brushed against the blazer of the man sitting next to him. The man pulled his arm away like he'd touched something dirty. Nora leaned over, whispered, "You belong here." Jerome didn't answer, but his jaw relaxed, just slightly. In the second row, directly behind Jerome, sat a woman named Dr. Eleanor Graves. Mid-60s, black, sharp eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses. A former MIT professor, currently serving on the Fields Medal Selection Committee, the highest honor in all of mathematics. She was here to evaluate the Whitmore-Caldwell Prize submissions. She noticed Jerome the moment he sat down. A black man in a janitor's uniform in the front row of a mathematics symposium. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. But she watched. The presentations began. First up, Tristan Cole, 26 years old, Whitmore's star protege. Tailored navy suit, perfect posture. He presented a 20-minute attempt at advancing the Bellingham conjecture using Whitmore's partition approach as a foundation. Polished slides, clean notation. The work was technically competent, solid, careful, safe, but the substance was incremental. He extended the framework by one small step. Nothing more, nothing bold. Whitmore sat in the front row, beaming like a proud father. He applauded before anyone else. The audience followed, polite, respectful, predictable. Second candidate, a topological approach, creative idea but poor execution. She got tangled in her own notation halfway through, stumbled over two definitions, lost the room. Scattered applause, eyes drifted to phones. Third candidate, a computational brute force strategy. Mountains of data, verified some edge cases, but no theoretical breakthrough, no spark. The audience clapped out of courtesy, nothing more. Then Whitmore took the stage. This was the main event, the reason the cameras were rolling. His keynote address. The state of the Bellingham conjecture. He walked to the massive whiteboard that dominated the stage, adjusted his microphone, picked up the chalk, and began building. Line by line, he constructed his latest argument, a new lemma, a fresh narrowing of the conjecture's boundaries. His handwriting was sharp, his confidence was absolute. The room leaned forward, cameras zoomed in on the board. This was Gerald Whitmore at his peak, a man performing intellect like a concert pianist performing Mozart. Every stroke deliberate, every pause dramatic. Jerome sat perfectly still. His eyes tracked every line, every symbol, every logical step. His breathing slowed, His hand drifted to his pocket. A small notebook, a pencil stub worn down to 2 inches. He began writing, quietly, below the sightline of anyone around him. But Eleanor Graves saw. She leaned forward in her seat. Her eyes moved between Jerome's notebook and the whiteboard, back and forth, back and forth. Whitmore finished to strong applause. Sustained. Warm. He smiled, basked in it, then opened the floor for Q&A. Hands went up across the auditorium, doctoral students, visiting scholars, technical questions, polite challenges. Whitmore handled each one with practiced ease, smooth, commanding. One by one, the hands lowered. Then silence. No more questions. Except one, in the front row. A single hand, steady, unhurried, attached to a gray uniform sleeve. Jerome Sullivan's hand was in the air. The murmur spread through the auditorium like a slow wave. 500 people staring at the janitor in the front row with his hand raised. Whitmore saw him. His smile disappeared. "Mr. Sullivan, this is a Q&A for mathematicians." Jerome didn't lower his hand. "I have a question about your lemma." What did Jerome see in that lemma? What had he written in that little notebook? And why did Eleanor Graves just close her pen, like she already knew what was coming? Whitmore let Jerome speak. He had no choice. 500 people were watching. The cameras were live. Jerome stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He spoke the way his grandmother taught him. Clear. Steady. Like the answer was obvious and he was just being polite about it. In line 6 of your lemma, you assumed the convergence is uniform. But if the sequence is only pointwise convergent in the boundary case, your inequality in line 8 collapses. Have you tested it against the Kessler counterexample from 1989? Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. Whitmore turned to the board. His eyes went to line 6, then to line 8. His chalk hand hovered in the air. 10 seconds passed. 20. The room watched a tenured professor stand frozen in front of his own work. "That's an interesting observation. I'll revisit it." He moved on, changed the subject, asked if there were other questions, but the damage was done. 3 visiting professors in the 4th row exchanged glances. A woman from Columbia wrote something in her notebook, and behind Jerome, Dr. Eleanor Graves leaned back in her chair with the faintest trace of a smile. Jerome sat down. Nora Callahan stared at him with her mouth open. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He just folded his hands and waited. The session ended 20 minutes later. People filed out. The buzz in the hallway was electric. Not about Whitmore's keynote, but about what the janitor had said. Then the fallout began. Mini-win. After the session, Dr. Graves found Jerome in the hallway. She walked straight to him, didn't hesitate, didn't look at his uniform. "Where did you study?" "I didn't finish. The Kessler counterexample isn't taught in any standard curriculum. It's buried in a 1991 issue of the Annals of Mathematics. Where did you learn it?" Jerome paused. Then, quietly, "The recycling bin. Somebody threw it out." Graves stared at him for a long time. Then she reached into her jacket and handed him her card. "Call me if you need anything. And I mean anything." She walked away. Jerome looked at the card. His hand was trembling, not from fear, from something he hadn't felt in a long time. Being seen. Mini loss. The next morning, Jerome arrived at work to find his supervisor waiting at the basement entrance, arms crossed, face tight. "Whitmore filed a formal complaint. Says you were disruptive at an academic event. I've got to write you up, Jerry. Jerome took the written warning, read it, signed it. His supervisor, a decent man who had never asked Jerome a single question about his life, shifted his weight and said, "Look, just keep your head down. You've got a good thing here, benefits, steady check. Don't mess it up over some math nonsense." Math nonsense. 9 years of invisible work. Dismissed in 2 words. Jerome put the warning in his locker, right next to 36 notebooks full of equations no one had ever read. Mini-win. That afternoon, Nora Callahan found Jerome mopping the second-floor hallway. She was carrying a stack of current journals, not from the recycling bin, from the department library. "The symposium has a second day," she said. "There's an open problem session. Anyone can submit a written solution attempt. It's technically open to the public." Jerome stopped mopping. "Anyone?" "Anyone. You just need to register and submit preliminary notes by Thursday." His eyes lit up. For the first time in this story, something that looked like hope crossed Jerome Sullivan's face. Mini loss. That night, Jerome began working on a full approach to the Bellingham conjecture. He sat at his kitchen table after an 8-hour shift of scrubbing, hauling trash, and cleaning bathrooms. His hands ached, his back was stiff, but his mind was on fire. His approach was bold. Build on Whitmore's partition framework, but fix the convergence flaw he'd identified. Reroute the proof through a different mathematical landscape. He wrote for hours. Pages filled up. The structure took shape. Then he hit a wall. One critical step required a technique from algebraic geometry, a field Jerome had never formally studied. He'd taught himself number theory, analysis, topology, all from discarded textbooks and recycled journals. But algebraic geometry had gaps, deep ones, and this step needed precision he didn't have. He sat back, stared at the ceiling. The clock read 3:14 a.m. Mini-win. He picked up Dr. Graves's card, dialed the number. She answered on the second ring, at 3 in the morning, like she'd been waiting. "I'm stuck," he said. No preamble, no apology. "Where?" "The bridge between the partition framework and the boundary collapse. I need an algebraic geometry tool I don't have." Graves didn't solve it for him. She didn't offer to co-author. She didn't steal his spotlight. She said 6 words. "Read Hartwell, 1998, Section 4. Jerome found the paper at the public library the next morning. Section 4. The technique was there, a correspondence between modular forms and algebraic curves that he could adapt. He read it twice, then a third time. The gap closed. The bridge held. He went back to work, mopped floors until 5 p.m., then sat down and wrote until 3 a.m. again. Mini loss. Thursday morning. Jerome submitted his registration and preliminary notes for the open problem session. 2 hours later, Whitmore was in Dean Harold Pemberton's office. A custodial employee submitting a solution to the Bellingham conjecture. Whitmore's voice was calm, controlled, disgusted. "If we allow this, we become a joke. Every university in the country will laugh at us. A janitor, a black janitor, with no degree, presenting at our symposium? It's an embarrassment." The dean hesitated. He valued Whitmore's opinion. He feared Whitmore's influence. "I'll flag the submission for administrative review," the dean said. "We'll determine whether custodial staff qualify under the open participation policy." Whitmore smiled. "Thank you, Harold. Standards matter." Jerome didn't know any of this. He was in the basement cleaning toilets. The clock was ticking. 48 hours until the open session. Mini-win. That evening, Ray Dawson, Jerome's fellow janitor, a 61-year-old man who had cleaned Ashford's floors for 22 years, found Jerome in the break room. Jerome was hunched over his notebook, pencil moving fast, eyes red from no sleep. Ray sat down across from him. Didn't say anything for a while, just watched. Then quietly, "I don't know what you're doing, Jerry. I don't understand a single thing in that notebook. But I've been cleaning up after these people for 22 years, and I've never, not once, seen one of them look scared of me." He leaned forward. "That professor looks scared of you today. You finish what you started." Jerome looked up. For a moment, neither man spoke. 22 years of mopping floors. 22 years of being invisible. And here, in a basement break room that smelled like bleach and burnt coffee, one invisible man recognized another. Jerome nodded. He worked through the night. 48 hours. The proof was almost complete. The open session was coming, and somewhere above him, in a mahogany office, powerful men were already working to make sure he never reached that stage. But Jerome Sullivan had survived worse than powerful men. He'd survived being forgotten. And forgotten men have nothing left to lose. The morning of the open session. Jerome arrived at the auditorium at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes early. 12 handwritten pages in his hand. Clean, precise, every line checked twice. His proof. His shot. He walked to the registration table. A young volunteer in a lanyard scanned the list, flipped a page, flipped another. "I'm sorry, sir, your name isn't on the approved list." Jerome's grip tightened on the pages. "I submitted my registration Thursday, with preliminary notes." The volunteer looked uncomfortable. "Dean Pemberton's office flagged your submission for administrative review. It hasn't been cleared." Jerome stood there. 12 pages. 2 sleepless nights, 3 a.m. phone calls, a lifetime of invisible work, and a clipboard with his name missing from it. People walked past him. Some glanced at his uniform. One man smirked. A woman stepped around him like he was a wet floor sign. He didn't move. Then Nora Callahan came running down the hallway, out of breath, face flushed. She grabbed Jerome's arm and pulled him to the side. "It's worse than you think." Jerome looked at her. "I've been digging. Whitmore didn't just block your submission, he reviewed your preliminary notes. The ones you submitted with your registration form, he read them, Jerome." She paused, swallowed hard. "He took your convergence correction. The one you presented during Q&A. The one he said he'd revisit. He built it into his own revised lemma. He's presenting an updated keynote in 2 hours. Your fix, your insight, under his name." The hallway noise faded. Jerome heard nothing, saw nothing, just Nora's face. Angry, heartbroken, helpless. "He stole your work, Jerome." Jerome looked down at his 12 pages. The proof that built on the very correction Whitmore had taken. The work that grew from a recycling bin, a kitchen table, and a grandmother's voice saying numbers don't see color. Stolen. Not dismissed. Not ignored. Stolen. Because Whitmore had looked at Jerome's notes and realized something that terrified him. The janitor wasn't guessing. The janitor was right, and rather than admit that, rather than stand in front of 500 people and say a black man in a gray uniform saw what he couldn't, Gerald Whitmore chose to steal. That was the moment the story changed. This was no longer about proving competence. This was about theft, credit, justice. A man with power taking from a man with none because he could, because he assumed no one would believe the janitor. Jerome could have walked away, folded his pages, gone back to the basement. No one would have blamed him. No one would have noticed. He looked at the auditorium doors. He didn't walk away. But how do you fight a man who already has your weapon in his hands? Jerome sat on a bench outside Hargrove Hall. The proof, all 12 pages, rested in his lap. The edges were soft from handling. A coffee stain marked the corner of page 4. His pencil notes were so precise they looked printed. 2 nights of work, a lifetime of preparation, and nowhere to take it. He watched the doors of the auditorium. People streamed in, professors in dark suits, students with lanyards and laptops, a camera crew adjusting a tripod. Everyone walking with purpose, everyone belonging. Jerome sat on the bench in his janitor's uniform, not belonging, not expected, not wanted. He pulled out his phone, called Dr. Graves. 1 ring, 2, 3. Voicemail. She was already inside, already in her evaluator's seat, already watching the stage where Whitmore was about to present stolen work to a room full of people who would applaud him for it. Jerome put the phone down. He thought about his grandmother. Not a long memory, not a sentimental one, just a single image, sharp, clear, like a photograph he'd been carrying in his chest for 30 years. Dolores Sullivan, 70 years old, kitchen table in Roxbury, a single lamp, a calculus textbook open between them. Jerome was 18, scared, about to leave for college, afraid he wasn't good enough, afraid the world would see his skin before his mind. His grandmother had put her hand on his, looked him in the eye, and said, "The answer doesn't care who finds it, baby. Numbers don't see color, they just see truth." Jerome stared at the pages in his lap. Numbers don't see color. But people do. And people controlled the doors, the stages, the microphones, the prizes. People decided who got to speak and who got to mop. And right now, the people in that building had decided that Jerome Sullivan was not welcome. He looked at the trash can next to the bench. Green metal, overflowing with coffee cups and napkins. His hand moved toward it. He held the pages over the opening, 12 pages. 3 years of silent work. The answer to a 100-year-old question. Hovering over the garbage. His hand shook. Then a voice behind him. "You still here?" Jerome turned. Ray Dawson. Gray uniform, mop in hand. Pushing his cleaning cart across the courtyard. Same route he'd walked every day for 22 years. Same invisible path. Ray stopped, looked at Jerome, looked at the pages in his hand, looked at the trash can. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask why Jerome was sitting outside instead of inside. He already knew. Men like them always knew. "I thought you had somewhere to be," Ray said. Jerome shook his head. "They blocked me. Submission wasn't approved. And Whitmore, he took my work. He's presenting it right now, under his name." Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, slow, like a man who had heard this kind of story before. Different details. Same ending. "Ain't nobody gonna open that door for you, Jerry." He looked toward the building, then back at Jerome. "You know that." Jerome stared at him. 2 janitors, 2 invisible men, sitting outside a building full of people who had never learned their names. Ray picked up his mop, started walking again, then stopped. "You got your badge?" Jerome blinked. "What?" "Your custodial badge, the one that opens the service entrance." Jerome reached into his pocket, felt the hard plastic edge. The badge he swiped every night to enter the auditorium through the backstage loading dock. The door he used to mop the stage before events. The entrance nobody watched because nobody cared who cleaned the building. The janitor's entrance. Jerome looked at Ray. Ray didn't smile, he just nodded once and walked away. Jerome stood up, put the 12 pages in his back pocket. Walked past the front entrance, the one with the security desk, the one where his name wasn't on the list, the one that had been closed to him his entire life. He went around back, down the service corridor. The hallway smelled like floor wax and industrial soap. He swiped his badge. The light turned green. The door clicked open. He was inside. The man they hired to clean the stage was about to stand on it. Whitmore was 10 minutes into his updated keynote when Jerome stepped through the side door. The auditorium was full. 500 seats, everyone taken. Cameras streaming live. The whiteboard behind Whitmore was covered in equations. His revised lemma, line by careful line. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. And in a way, he had. Because buried in the heart of his revised proof, in the critical fix that made the whole thing hold together, was Jerome Sullivan's work. The convergence correction. The insight Jerome had given freely during Q&A in front of this very room just 2 days ago. Now repackaged, relabeled, presented as Whitmore's own breakthrough. A key insight I developed over the past week, Whitmore said, tapping line 6 with his chalk. A shift from uniform to point-wise convergence in the boundary case. This changes everything. In the second row, Dr. Eleanor Graves was not clapping. Her arms were crossed, her jaw was tight. She recognized the correction. She had watched Jerome Sullivan say those exact words into a microphone 48 hours ago. Whitmore pushed forward. He built line after line. The audience followed. The cameras zoomed in. He was approaching the critical juncture, the point where the Bellingham conjecture would either crack open or hold firm. Then he slowed, because this was where his work ended. Everything beyond this point required a bridge, a connection between his partition framework and a deeper geometric structure. A bridge he didn't have. A bridge that existed only in 12 handwritten pages sitting in the back pocket of a janitor's uniform. Whitmore started improvising. His chalk strokes grew hesitant. He waved his hand over a gap in the logic. From here, the result follows naturally through standard extension methods. It didn't. And every serious mathematician in the room knew it. The side door opened. Jerome Sullivan walked in. Gray uniform, work boots, no badge, no lanyard, no invitation. He came down the side aisle with 12 pages in his hand. His footsteps were the only sound in the room. Heads turned. A murmur rippled through 500 people. The janitor. The one from Q&A. The one with the question. Whitmore saw him. His chalk hand froze. Mr. Sullivan, this is a closed session. You used my correction. Jerome's voice was calm. Not loud, not angry. The microphone on the podium caught it anyway. Every speaker in the auditorium carried it to every seat. Line 6, the convergence fix. I told you about it 2 days ago. In this room. On camera. You said you'd revisit it. He held up his 12 pages. You didn't revisit it. You took it. And you put your name on it. The room went cold. 500 people stopped breathing. The cameras were still rolling. The live stream was still running. Every word was being recorded. Whitmore's face darkened. This is absurd. Security, let him speak. The voice came from the second row. Dr. Eleanor Graves stood. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. When a Fields Medal Committee member speaks, rooms obey. She looked at Dean Pemberton, who was already half standing, unsure which way to fall. Let him speak. The dean sat back down. Jerome walked to the whiteboard. He stood next to Whitmore, janitor beside professor, gray uniform beside tailored suit. He looked at Whitmore's work. Every line, every symbol. Then he picked up the chalk. He didn't erase anything. He didn't need to. He started where Whitmore stopped. Step 1. Jerome drew a horizontal line under Whitmore's last equation. Below it, he wrote a single substitution. a transformation that shifted the entire problem from number theory into a geometric framework. The same technique he'd used on problem 3 of the qualifying exam, but scaled up, applied to a conjecture-level problem. The room stirred. A visiting professor from Stanford sat forward in his seat.
Step 2. Jerome introduced a modular symmetry argument. 4 lines, each one connecting Whitmore's partition approach to a structure from algebraic geometry, the technique Dr. Graves had pointed him toward. Hartwell, 1998, Section 4. Every line followed inevitably from the one before it. Clean, logical, undeniable. A professor from Columbia whispered to his colleague, "My God." Step 3. Jerome picked up the Kessler counterexample, the same boundary condition he'd cited during Q&A, and inverted it. Instead of using it to show what failed, he turned it into a constructive tool. 3 lines. The conjecture's 100-year resistance began to crack. The audience was no longer murmuring. They were silent. Completely silent. Step 4. Jerome paused. He looked at the board, took a breath. Then he wrote 1 line. A single equivalence. 1 statement that reduced the entire Bellingham conjecture to a known, previously proven theorem. The moment the chalk lifted from the board, the proof was complete. 103 years. Over. In 1 line. Jerome set the chalk down on the ledge, stepped back, turned to face the room. 500 people. No sound, no movement, nothing. Dr. Eleanor Graves was the first. She rose from her seat, slowly, and began to clap. 1 pair of hands in a silent room. Then Nora Callahan stood. Then a visiting professor, then another, then a row, then a section. The applause built like a wave until it crashed against the walls. 500 people on their feet. Some were clapping, some were shaking their heads in disbelief. A woman in the 6th row was crying. Jerome stood at the whiteboard in his janitor's uniform, chalk dust on his fingers. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He just stood there. Then he spoke, quietly, directly to Whitmore. But every microphone in the room carried it. Your partition approach was the right foundation. You were closer than anyone in 100 years. But you couldn't finish it because you made the same assumption everyone else made, that convergence was uniform. It isn't. And you knew that, because I showed you. And instead of giving credit where it was due, you put your name on it. Whitmore said nothing. His face was gray. Dr. Graves, still standing, turned to the room. Her voice was clear and steady. For the record, I watched Mr. Sullivan identify the convergence error during the Q&A session. In this room. On camera. Before Professor Whitmore's revised keynote. Every head turned to Whitmore. He stood at the edge of his own stage. The stage he had built. The stage he had controlled for 25 years. He looked at the whiteboard. At the proof. At the single line that ended a century of failure. A long silence. Then 3 words. The proof is correct. The room exhaled. 500 people released a breath they didn't know they were holding. And Jerome Sullivan, janitor, dropout, invisible man, stood at the center of it all. Chalk dust on his hands, truth on the board, and not a single person in that room who could look away. The session ended in chaos. Within minutes, clips from the live stream were everywhere. Every major platform, every feed. A janitor in a gray uniform solving a 100-year-old math problem on a stolen stage. The moment Jerome set down the chalk, that single frame, became the most shared image in academic history overnight. By midnight, the hashtag was trending in 14 countries. But the real twist didn't come from the internet. It came the next morning, behind closed doors. Dr. Eleanor Graves called an emergency session of the Whitmore Caldwell Prize Committee. She arrived with a folder. Inside it, 3 pieces of evidence. First, time-stamped video from day 1's Q&A session. Jerome Sullivan, in his janitor's uniform, standing in the front row, identifying the convergence error in Whitmore's original lemma. Date-stamped, time-stamped, recorded on Ashford's own cameras. 2 full days before Whitmore's revised keynote. Second, a sworn statement from Nora Callahan confirming that Jerome had submitted preliminary notes with his registration form on Thursday morning. Notes that included the convergence correction. Notes that Whitmore had accessed through the dean's office before his updated presentation. Third, a side-by-side comparison. Jerome's preliminary notes on the left, Whitmore's revised keynote slides on the right. The language was different, the symbols were rearranged, but the mathematical structure was identical. Line for line, step for step. The committee deliberated for less than 40 minutes. 3 decisions. The Whitmore Caldwell Prize, $250,000, was awarded to Jerome Sullivan for the first complete proof of the Bellingham conjecture. A formal academic misconduct inquiry was opened against Professor Gerald Whitmore for presenting uncredited work. Jerome's proof would be published in the Annals of Mathematics, the same journal he had once pulled from a recycling bin in the basement of Hargrove Hall. Dean Harold Pemberton delivered the news personally. He stood in the basement hallway, the same hallway where Whitmore had once told Jerome to stay where he belonged. The dean's hands were shaking. He couldn't meet Jerome's eyes. Jerome listened, nodded, then said one thing. "I'd like my grandmother's name in the acknowledgments." The dean blinked. That's all?" Jerome looked at him. "That's everything." 1 month later, Jerome Sullivan stood at a podium. Not in Hargrove Hall, at MIT. Kresge Auditorium, 300 seats, standing room only. He wore a blazer, his first, dark navy. It didn't quite fit around the shoulders. Inside the breast pocket, clipped where no one could see it, was his Ashford custodial ID badge. He kept it. Dr. Eleanor Graves introduced him. She didn't call him a janitor. She didn't call him an underdog. She said, "One of the most original mathematical minds I have encountered in 40 years of evaluating Fields Medal candidates." Jerome spoke for 20 minutes. He didn't mention Whitmore. He didn't talk about injustice. He talked about the math, step by step, clear, patient, the way his grandmother taught him to explain things, like the person listening mattered. When he finished, the ovation lasted 2 full minutes. Whitmore was not in the audience. He had taken a sabbatical. The misconduct inquiry was ongoing. He had not spoken publicly. But 2 weeks after the symposium, he had sent Jerome an email. 1 line. "The substitution in step 1 was beautiful. I wouldn't have seen it." Jerome never replied. He didn't need to. Back at Ashford, Jerome returned to Hargrove Hall one last time. He walked down the corridor lined with oil portraits, white faces, gold frames, names carved into brass plaques. The same hallway he had mopped for 9 years. At the end of the hall there was a new frame. Inside it, a photograph. Not of Jerome in a blazer, not of Jerome at a podium. A photograph of Jerome in his janitor's uniform, chalk in hand, standing at the whiteboard during the symposium. Below it, a plaque, Jerome Sullivan. Proof of the Bellingham conjecture, Ashford University. He looked at it for a long time. He didn't smile. He nodded and walked out. Jerome Sullivan didn't wait for permission. He didn't need a title to prove what he already knew. He just needed someone to leave the chalk where he could reach it. If this story moved you, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told you didn't belong, drop a comment. Tell me your story. I read every one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.
And if there one thing I hope you take from this, is this. The talent doesn't need a degree to be real. It doesn't need a title. It doesn't need someone's approval. If you know what you know it. No uniform, no job title, no person standing over you can take that away. They can ignore it. They can mock it. They can even steal it, but they can't undo it. Truth doesn't disappear just because powerful people pretend it's not there. And let's talk about the people who look at someone and decide, based on what they wear, where they work, what they look like, that they have nothing to offer. That kind of blindness isn't just cruel, it's stupid. You could be standing next to greatness every single day and never know it, because you never bother to look past the surface. But the part that really stays with me, nobody opened the door, nobody. He had to find his own way in. And that doesn't make the arrival any less valid. It makes it more so. Because sometimes the people who find the hardest to get into the room are the ones who change everything once they are inside. So tell me, have you ever been invisible to people who should have seen you? Drop it in the comments. If this one hit you, share it, like it, subscribe so you are here for the next one. Because the answer doesn't care who finds it. It just cares that it's true.